One of the biggest things that determine the value of a city has to do with what is considered the community's cultural assets. And the same thing happens for the state level. The value of the state has to do with what is considered that state's unique cultural assets. And what people started to do was plot ways to give the advantage to themselves for ownership of the cultural assets. So they wanted to be able to say that either we made these cultural assets possible, or we own them, or we conceived it, it was our idea. And they knew that no one individual could take something from somebody, and they knew that no one group could steal something from somebody or force somebody into some position. So they came up with these systems to get as many people as they could working for the same effort to overwhelm whatever was going on. So it would be a collective group mentality, an involuntary investment made by the greater majority of the people using strength in numbers to take advantage of people. So say, for example, some one individual person comes up with this unique innovation, or they have a story surrounding them or their life that's sellable beyond the marketplace, and they have sole ownership and possession of their property. Well, how do people who want to take that from them and tell their version of that story or use it for their version of a cultural asset, how do they get access to that if it belongs to somebody else and they have no permission? Well, they can cause something to happen to a person, or they can come together with a group mentality that says, look, okay, everybody's going to get in on this together, and we're going to shut down this person's resources so they have no means for survival whatsoever unless they let us have them. And so you see people that end up broken, hopeless, spiritless, and taken advantage of. You see a lot of people have nervous breakdowns. You see a lot of people commit suicide. You see a lot of people go into these rage-driven retributions, similar to what Rusty Hauser did, and several other things like that. It's a mentality that they have here collectively. And what I found strange about it was the same thing that I found strange about a question I had for a lady who wrote about some lynchings in nearby Harris County. How do people who profess themselves people of faith, who go to church every week, saying that they're good people who live by God, how are they willing to engage collectively and hide these kinds of secrets from people every day and then continue to tell themselves that nothing is wrong with them and that they're actually being responsible through faith? Well, they can't. And it just goes to show you how the human condition and human nature can end up being something that disregards the intent and the purpose of everything, including faith, the law, and societal structure, for some type of personal motivation to take advantage of people. People have to remember that Georgia is basically one of the hubs of the most brutal system of involuntary servitude, slavery, in the history of the nation. They started it. They built the laws around it. Our Congress made it a national investment. This isn't something that somebody's making up. This isn't something somebody's trying to use as an excuse. This isn't something somebody's trying to use as a guilt system. This is the truth. This is the fact. And you still have these people in this psychology that believe that they're supposed to be in ownership of somebody. They could have used the same effort to empower the people who had the innovation, who had the gift, who had the intellectual property. But they want to take control of it, and they're saying that if you don't let us take advantage of you, if you don't let us exploit you, then we're either going to try to harm you or we're going to cut off all the resources from you. And fortunately, I had not let these people get into my life in any manner, had any control of any aspect of my life. And some of that had to be through some faith and divine intervention that I was not responsible for. I just know that I've lived my life as a private person. I didn't go out of my way to let people into places that they aren't supposed to be. And that's just my nature. And a lot of the most important things are things that had no material outward presence. So there are some things that they could never get to unless I release it from the inside of me as an individual. And so what happens when a bunch of people have made an involuntary investment in something intended to make somebody fail as a sellable story? People don't realize how much failure and tragedy sells in this country. You can come up with a terrible, negative tragedy or a loss or failure and make it seem like, well, oh, it's because this person grew up poor, or it's because they were black, or it was because they were a raging alcoholic or an addict, or something that they'll come up with to say, well, this person was cut short because of this or that. They were blacklisted. They were this or that. Well, I was never counting on those groupings and associations. I had an opportunity to be a part of many of those things when I was younger, and I opted to go out and see what God intended for me to do as my own unique self and contribute to the society and the world in which I live, to share it with people. I was never under the impression or taught that I was supposed to say, hey, anybody who wants me, I'm yours. I was never put into the frame of mentality that I was supposed to be some type of indentured servant or involuntary servant of some kind. I grew up on basic principles of getting what you work for. And I found out that there were people and things and forces inhibiting your ability to be able to gain from what you work for. That's what they call an oppression, and that's what they call disenfranchisement. And most people that complain of those things have no way to prove that it's actually going on, and I turned out to be one of the people who did. I think the peer associations, the exploitation of the audience, using ways to divide people through race, through social network media, through club mentalities and what have you, destroyed the socialization in this country. Nobody can really trust anybody, even if they're a part of those groups. They started to come up with these community organized situations for living arrangements where they build these giant complexes, and all of these people come together and they live nearby one another, meaning that you have more people close in proximity for your protection and for investment in things that sustain all of you. But what are you sacrificing to do so? Well, nobody can even flush the toilet and take a pee without somebody knowing about it. Well, what kind of world do we live in when you can't have the basic function of your personal privacy to do the things that you want to do without somebody watching and listening to your every move? And what part of your soul and your sanctity are you willing to sacrifice to be a part of a group of people who really, aside from this collective association, might have no value or inclusion in anything that really sustains your life? There were two very different worlds going on in Columbus, Georgia. One that was civilized and one that is clearly uncivilized. And the services were given to the people that seem more civilized and functional. And the places where the actual need is, the purpose for the system in the first place, is not being served. I mean, you can act like a complete animalistic, wild, feral, savage person in Columbus, Georgia with no consequence. And they will literally attack somebody who is not doing anything wrong nor contributing to whatever is going on that's wrong. They will consequence that person worse than they will a savage. Now listen as I'm doing this piece here in the background. Now, who thinks that people have a standard of normal communication that is allowed to publicly disrupt a neighborhood in a manner where you can hear them speaking to 4 blocks away every day, all night long, in a drug or alcohol induced state of conscientiousness, where they would be acting like that whether they had sobriety or whether they were completely inebriated? Well, that's allowed to go on in Columbus, Georgia. As a matter of fact, if you call the police to come and do something about this type of public conduct, they will attack the people that called for the service and not do anything about these types of issues. So when you're talking about what deteriorates the value, when you're talking about what destroys what is considered to be the validity of a cultural asset, you can dictate some of that based upon what they're willing to invest in versus not invest in. What if the best things that are actually real cultural assets are not getting support? Well, something that's not a real cultural asset can look like it's more valuable than something that actually is, simply because they decided collectively, we're going to support this instead of that. And so when you have this type of disorganization, this type of poor oversight, this type of disregard for function in society, these things are going to happen. So when you're trying to figure out how somebody like me, as gifted as I am, ends up in the kinds of positions that I found myself in, they cause it here. They do it. I just simply did not let them. When they thought they were putting me into a position to destroy and ruin me, I decided to take exactly what they were doing and not only document it and show people not only what it was, but who was causing it, but I continued to pursue the work and the goals that I had been working on anyway. I was not able to invest in it in the manner that was necessary, that I wanted to. I could only do a little bit at a time based upon the conditions and circumstances, because there was constant interruption. There was constant attempts to derail. There was constant attempts to try to criminalize me and scandalize me. And ultimately, they were just trying to take away the value of what I am as a cultural asset by trying to disparage me, trying to make me look bad, trying to make me seem like something was wrong or that there was a threat. And I'm not the only person they've done it to. They've done this stuff historically to many people. I just happen to be the person that not only knew what it was, but I did something about it. And I didn't tell them what I was going to do. I did not protest. I did not make a bunch of disturbance that was unnecessary. I let them treat me like they thought me to be. I let them do what they thought they were successful at when they destroyed everybody else. Look at the case of Lance Brown. Look at the case of Ed Pasucci. Look at the case of Mildred Upshaw. Look at the case of George Smith. These cases indicate to you clearly that this had been going on a long time. Look at the case of Frank Cook and the woman that they called Mary, who sat in the park 24 hours a day. She went through a bad divorce and had a nervous breakdown, and she slept in the park 24 hours a day in danger, trying to find some kind of way to not give up. And I would go over to her and I would give her food and milk and whatever she would ask for each day, and people helped her survive until they figured out how to get her back into her normalcy. They invested culturally in poverty to keep class separation going here. The documents that you will see attached with this information will show you clearly they had to have planned it. They had to have invested in it. Because part of how you seek funding, part of how you justify the systems that you have, including safety and social welfare, has to do with poverty. The whole government, to be perfectly honest with you, is primarily driven to keep a social balance, to make sure the needs of those who are less fortunate are served. See, the people who have everything already, they don't have any worries. The biggest battles they have are trying to figure out why they have to feel they have to pay so much to the people who haven't put in what they have put in terms of investment value as a cultural asset to the country. Why they have to pay for the poor people, so to speak. Why they have to pay more taxes and things like that. But the people who actually have the need, the people who are disparaged, the people who are marginalized, the people who make the primary use of the safety system and the court system necessary, the people who make the Department of Health and Human Services, which is for the social welfare of the people of the nation, necessary, are the people who have less. And so what they did was invested in poverty so that they would have a way to justifiably gentrify for redevelopment. See, the people that were poor were already down anyway. They didn't have anything. And so how do you get access to the value that can be gained if that property or that land is restored if you have people living there who aren't contributing to it? Well, they were finding ways to repopulate, to gentrify. You can kill people. You can wait till they get older. You can force them out of their places like they did down at BTW and rebuild on top of them and make them go somewhere else whether they want to or not. These are the kinds of things that they were doing because the plan that they had did not include the people. The plan that they had was a plan that they made from the inside for their own side of the population, and everybody else was going to be used as a cultural commodity. So when you destroy and gentrify areas in history, you destroy and gentrify the value of their cultural assets. Just because a person is poor does not mean they don't have any cultural value. Some of these people have greater cultural value than people who have everything that they can possibly imagine at their material disposal. And so who gets access to their cultural value if they get wiped out, forced out, displaced, forced into homelessness or sickness or what have you? Whoever gets that land, whoever gets that property. And that's what my piece on eminent domain and public property was about. To tell people how they were systematically altering the course of history through documentation and literally history by seizing people's personal cultural value and their assets. And people who are low educated and people who didn't really care about those things in the first place, they might not even know their own cultural value in the first place. And so how do you take advantage of somebody who didn't even know they had it in the first place? And then they get caught up in that game and what have you. Well, I didn't worry about all that. I know what I was responsible for. I know what my value was. I know what the value of my family is, despite the fact that my family does not know their own cultural value. And I said, well, what do I have to do to take inventory of this, to get control of it, so that we can get some benefit of it, or we'll just return back to being in the position we were in when we were first conceived as slaves in the state of Georgia. So what they did was try to gang up and depict me as a public martyr. The same kinds of things they did to people like Martin Luther King or any other people who had a strong position and a cultural voice, who was educated, who had the potential to get people's attention. But this time it was different because black people became equally predatory against members of their own race in pursuit of the value of cultural assets, because they knew that the marketplace was moving towards a position where they could sell the value of black cultural assets for personal material gain. And basically, it seemed, from what I could conclude, that if you were not willing to let them exploit you, then they were saying, well, you're not with us. We're against you. And so now you have people with the obstacles of not only the status quo oppression, now you've got same race oppression going on at the same time. And a lot of people broke down from it. They went crazy. They had a nervous breakdown. They went into a violent driven rage or whatever would be what led to their downfall. But they would end up systemized, institutionalized, even criminalized and demonized. And then what happens then? Now, mind you, while all this is going on, the faith system is at play. And for what I'm describing to be possible, people that go to the churches that sustain the religious system had to have been involved. And how do you explain how people who profess themselves as faithful and devoted to God would contribute to public harm and social harm in this manner when the whole purpose and function of the church is to do the opposite? So it lets you know that it was and is complete chaos. And so I wrote a journalist one time and I asked one question: can a whole town be crazy? And I didn't say that to the effect that I'm saying that every single individual is functioning corruptly or insane. But if the general population has a set of values, ideologies, and beliefs that are clearly self-defeating, where the goals are not realistically being met as they are being depicted, and you continue to chase your tail, something's got to be wrong. If you invest in harm and then expect for something that's not harmful to come as a result, you've got to be crazy. If you see that there is trouble, if you see that there's injustice, if you see there are discrepancies and disparities, and you ignore it, something's got to be wrong with you. If you see a problem and you step past it or you contribute to worsening it, and you're in a public position of service and responsibility where you've been elected or appointed or what have you that led you there, and you don't do what you're supposed to, something's got to be wrong with you. If you are framing people in injustice, if you are giving disparate sentences, if you have a system where you're not serving one part of the social population and then you're claiming you don't know why the ills of society are taking place, something has got to be wrong with you. If you're going out and injuring people or attacking people or going into human predation against people that you don't know, who haven't done anything wrong, who doesn't owe you anything, who doesn't want anything from you, something's got to be wrong with you. The state of Georgia is being sued right now because systems so that people who have cognitive limitations or impairments or who have special needs for education are segregated from the general population and treated like basically a sick population. They're being sued. What kind of place conscientiously, willfully puts people who are already in trouble in that type of position? Now, they had an alternative school here at Daniel Middle School, which used to be a regular functional school, one of the best and most well-known schools here in Columbus, Georgia. And they turned it into an alternative school where they put the people, where they segregate the people who don't seem to be able to function in the regular school system. They were doing the same thing here, and they ended up closing the school down so that they could invest in allowing Walmart, a store chain, to invest on that property, trying to figure out a way to generate economics to offset the financial crisis that the community was going through. So let's just say they were making incredible strides forward, but getting nowhere because the same problems that persisted and that were there before they made the investment were never addressed and confronted. And so they got mad with me because they were treating people like human stock. They had plotted out and mapped out how they were going to use people's cultural assets and cultural value to sell it for movie depictions, for publishing, for innovations, and other forms of cultural asset that can turn over a profit and generate enough interest to make people want to be able to come here and find out more about it. And some of that was built on the fact that there were incredible pioneers who were already here from the past, who blazed the trail to show that some type of innovation that could touch the whole world could come out of a place like this. But they don't really know how that happened. They don't really know what it took. It seems like a bunch of people who were just saying, all right, this person did something incredible. Now, how can we get something for what they achieved? And so you saw all of these battles over estates and probate-related issues and people fighting over insurance and heirlooms and inheritances and all of this kind of stuff simultaneously, while people were looking for family history and genealogy, genetics, DNA, lineage, heritage, and what have you. And all of this was going on simultaneously. And little old Reggie, who was not trying to go too far, too fast, but with big aspirations that I wanted to make sure were attainable and that I was qualified to live up to, did something that they said was impossible for somebody to do coming from a small community like this. And they wanted so badly to either own it or interfere with it to stop what was natural that they could take no ownership of. They were willing to try to disparage me and ruin me if they thought they could have. So I had taken control of my personal information and started to solidify my own identity in a manner where whatever they were claiming, whatever they tried to use their collectives to do to overwhelm, would have no credence if people simply saw the fact. But we reached a point where society had become so corrupted, if you will, so jaded, that people were willing to resist the facts even when they knew something was wrong, just to win, if you will, to be a part of some collective effort to see if they could take over something. So the idea of democracy, the whole idea of rule of law, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, all of this stuff would be challenged. Religious liberty would come to the table where somebody who is one sex identity could deem themselves another sex identity on the basis that they just wanted to, not because it was natural. Everything was in limbo, in chaos. And a lot of people were taken advantage of. And see, if you die and you have all of these unresolved issues, take my word for it, it can last for generations. And you have predators who use the resources that they have at their disposal to take advantage of people that they know they can position. And the best weapon that I used was silence. When people were slaves years ago, if they chose to not speak, if they chose to not cooperate or whatever they want to call it, when nobody had the right based upon the Constitution to defend themselves, they would beat them and torture them and torment them repeatedly, willing to kill them if they did not allow their spirit to be broken and give in. That's why this is so important. And this is all of our history. This isn't just some black guy talking about black history where white people did everybody wrong. White people are just as accountable for how history has fallen into place in present day as any black people. Because if you've sat there and done nothing to contribute to the social welfare of your country, other than contribute to the same type of segregationist psychology, this entitlement attitude, this "it's not my problem" attitude, what gives you the right to judge somebody? And so basically, I did something about it. And I did something about it in such a manner that it exposed everybody, white, black, mixed race people, and everybody else, to show where we're all failing and where we can all be improving. Because I'm certainly by far not the only person that has had these experiences. Every now and then, God brings people along in history who can actually validate what's known. I did mine in a way and handle things in a way where not even the government could take away the credence, because they used to overwhelm people too. Run people crazy, have people paranoid, feeling watched, stalked, and what have you. End up in a position where people like John Nash from A Beautiful Mind and The Aviator and The Matrix and all of these movies about the mind breaking down that came into Hollywood. Hollywood plays a significant role in these things. But when you guys find out what the underlying motivation was, which I have not mentioned yet, you'll be very shocked. Because a person can be way more valuable than anybody can imagine in simply being held down, held back, and held out. Most people that judge people, most people that mistreat people, don't even know the people that they do that to. And if that isn't some form or degree of insanity, if that doesn't mean that you're bad, crazy in some kind of way, tell me exactly what that means and what that is. And keep in mind, before I close, that it wasn't me walking around looking for everybody and following people around and judging people. This collective of people targeted me. They could have just left me alone. I was minding my own business. I was doing my thing just like I am now. But because they had no control over it, because they couldn't take advantage of anybody willfully, because they were not allowed to lie and intimidate, we can see what they're capable of. But I did everything that I did on the principles of faith, in spite of how controversial any of it may seem to some people. I did what God intended for me to do, to make the society and the world in which I live better, and to make sure that people of color and everybody else were accounted for properly from a historic context. My history is American history. My history is black history. My history is white history. My history is history, period, for the world history. And so when they come across something that they said wasn't possible, that they have no earthly definition for, that they can't explain or justify, what do? I mean, the statisticians and the prognosticators said I couldn't be this person. They said I couldn't do what I'm doing. They said that somebody that came from what I came from was incapable of what you see before you. And they have no justification for saying they did anything or made any effort to contribute to it, meaning that eventually my value starts to outweigh the people who are pretending they are a cultural asset when they really haven't done anything. A lot of people achieve for doing nothing. They can't really show you anything that they actually did other than figure out how to manipulate people out of their resources and get enough money to make it look like they were doing far more than they actually did. And I'm not trying to undermine anybody, because some people that do very well work very hard. But a lot of people succeed because they were people who inherited something, for example. And what do they use their inheritance to do? Take other people's inheritances. So before you judge somebody, make sure you look and check for facts, because you might be completely being misled about what's actually taking place versus what it appears as. And if there's any place that has shown me definitively that a collective body of people will try to overwhelm and overthrow a person of influence, Columbus, Georgia has shown me that. I never thought I could see the government, the legal system, the law enforcement system, the faith system, and the social community try to come together collectively against somebody who did absolutely nothing wrong. But when I saw the case of Amanda Knox, who was involved in a terrible tragedy in Italy, and you could see that this person was completely out of it, had no real idea of what she had herself associated with based upon the way her lifestyle was at that time. And they put her into a position where she appeared to be a witch, and we saw an outright world-level manhunt, witch hunt to crucify this young white female in front of everybody. And I learned something from that. It validated that exactly what I'm describing to you can happen, and it has actually happened to a lot of people. But some people ended up being assassinated, some people ended up going crazy, some people ended up dying, some people ended up in these situations where some other form of destruction would come to them, leaving it all as a mystery. Some people were said to have overdosed and all kinds of stuff, trying to find a way to escape this kind of madness. So, what does this tell us about what's going on in reality versus the way it's being depicted? And I think we need to be looking much more carefully and much more deeply at our contribution to the things that destroy society. If you harm people, you harm society. And why isn't the same effort being made for the real threats, for the people and the things that really do injure society? Why aren't they investing the same thing into that as going on these public witch hunts against individual people that they want to be against? And every year, you're going to see somebody get picked to be the cultural whipping boy or the cultural whipping girl, where everybody invests in seeing what it takes to say every bad thing they can about somebody, judge every single thing they do, and ultimately trying to kill them spiritually, physically, economically, mentally, socially, and everything else. And some of the most incredible people are the ones that have survived and overcome the things I have described to you. Thank you very much for taking your time to listen, because this kind of insight is what gives you clarity not only into the person that provided the information, but perhaps it'll give you insight into what's going on with other people in society who are misunderstood or who you have confusion about. Something caused everything that's wrong. I'm going to say that again. Something caused everything that's wrong. There's some contribution to everything wrong, and you need to find out who's making that contribution, who's the cause of what goes wrong rather than right. The same amount of energy that it takes to harm somebody is the same amount of energy it takes to empower somebody. And why do some people, why have we become so comfortable as a society that's willing to harm the innocent in the way that we are? Why are we so fascinated by becoming fixed and obsessed on injustice, even as we contribute to knowing that somebody may be being harmed by our obsession with what's wrong? Why do so many people judge other people who don't actually do anything to help the people that they judge? I mean, something is functionally wrong about the human condition now. And that's not my individual problem to solve. It's each individual taking responsibility for their contribution to what makes the world worse or what makes the world that they live in better. God bless you. When trying to figure out what some of this is all about, we have to remember that in the past traditions, collective groups of people, the settlers, they would set up these specific kinds of areas and develop populations amongst one another. It was very localized. They had these kind of colonies. So when you go back to the old world exhibits, for example, you'll see that a lot of people from those particular periods in time spent most of their time around one another. And then they would develop a population. A few people from that population would leave and go elsewhere